Alrighty, this is War Sometimes Changes. I created the logo in the rulebook. Logo is right here. Rulebook, as you can see. The only thing that was used that was not created by me was the bicycle cards over here. In terms of the requirement, you needed to make sure that your rules can be reversed at some point. In my case, I denoted it down by the blue and the red that you can see here, which is why the entire rulebook is actually split like that. For setup, all you do is you shuffle the deck first and then give each player 5 cards face down. Cards are over here, so you just take these, one moment, like so. We're going to be able to see the cards. Normally you would not be able to see what cards your opponent has, but for the sake of this demonstration, I will show you what both sides have. Here are all the values for all the different cards in the corner. So after you've dealt the cards, you make sure that this one right here is on the blue side, as this is normal. Red is the reverse, which I'll get into that in a second. So as I said, you're not supposed to let other people see your cards, but in a normal version, so before it's been reversed, every turn a player will draw a card from this pile, each one, and then they can look through their hand and decide to put something down. So I'm going to just go over the normal rules first for convenience. Now in normal, the person with the higher card wins that round, and then they collect both of the cards that they picked up that they won in the round. If you place down the same card, so 2 8s, 2 5s, that will trigger a war. In wars, players shuffle their deck and put down 5 cards. Once they put down the 5 cards, as you can see over here, you add the numbers top to bottom. Whoever has the highest number is the winner of that round, and they win the game at that point. You can choose to do multiple rounds if you would like to continue, best of 3, for example, or best of 5. I left it as just one, just to try to accommodate as many different games as possible, as it is very likely that the game could go back and forth for a bit. I didn't want it to have a scenario where it's been going on too long, but that changes up to the players. Now, for the normal extra war trigger, if players run out of cards in this stack, it just triggers a war automatically, so you'd follow the steps I mentioned before and you would figure out who won. We're going to loop back up to the reverse rules. So the turn actions are the same, except the person with the lower card is the winner. And for the war, over here, you would subtract the numbers bottom to top. So if you have, let's say, these cards here, which we'll look at very quickly, you have all these cards, and they're stacked on top of each other, which I won't do just so you could see them. In a normal game, you would add them together this way, basically, if they were stacked on. Whereas if it's reverse, you would subtract them this way. In terms of the extra triggers for reverse, instead of drawing a card every turn, they discard a card before they choose whatever they want to place. So because of that, once one of the players is down to 5 cards, it doesn't matter which one, as long as one of them is, then it will just trigger a war right then and there. If either reverse card, which the reverse cards is aces and the jokers, if any of those guys show up during a war, they they are given this value over here, 10 and 11, respectively, just as a way to make sure that if they did show up, they have some kind of meaning, considering without it, you would just be down a card, which undermines the entire strategy. The last thing to note is if an ace or joker has been placed down, whoever dealt that card is the winner, because if you place that card down, that then reverses the next round. So if you were on normal, you go to reverse and vice versa. If that was placed, so let's say this joker here, if this player placed the joker, granted they would have another card, but for argument's sake, let's say they placed the joker and then the other player placed the 8. We would now flip this, and this player down here would be the one who won that particular round, so they would collect the cards. For these general gameplay, I'll do a very brief one just so you could see what it is like. Alright, as you can see, everything is now flipped over, and as I said, you start on normal, so each player is going to draw a card. I'm just going to leave them face up so you can see them. So they got a 5, they got a 4. Now, let's say this player down here, since they were fortunate and got a joker, let's say for this round, they decide, I'm going to place this joker down. So they place it down, and the other player places the 2, just because they realize they had 2 2s and they just want to get rid of them, because they're going for a strategy of they're trying to win on normal. So if you're trying to win on normal, you'd want a ton of high cards, of course. Granted, having high cards would be useful regardless, but it does come with the risk of now you're playing low cards, so you might be giving your opponent more cards, which may skew their potential or not. Regardless, we go back here and they triggered the war. So now you take these cards, both sets, and you'd shuffle them. Give me a moment. Okay, I did shuffle them, but I remembered, because it's important, you just flip this over. So remember the rules now. They're trying to aim for a, they're going to want to aim for the lower cards now. So they're discarding a card every turn, as I said before. So I shuffled both of them. And as I said before, at the start of each of the turns, you're either picking up or discarding a card. So now, both of them have to discard the one card, one of these cards. So they're going to both be down a card, which for the bottom player was the queen, and this one was the 2. So now they both only have 4 cards. You would match these. So say if one player only has 3 cards and the other one has more, the player that has more, they would simply pick those 3. 3 out of their larger deck. Randomly, of course. So if we do like this, and we're looking at the cards, right, and we have these guys right here. Like I said, I'm not stacking them on top of each other just for a clearer visual more than anything. But if I go like this is what the top players got. This is what the bottom players got. So when you're trying to do the calculations, for argument's sake, if this was stacked, this would be on the top and this would be on the bottom. So since you're going from bottom to top, you would subtract these numbers from each other. So I'm going to do that really quick. This bottom player got -21. The top player only got -17, so this bottom player was the winner. You can trigger it. As I said, it triggers when they both only have 5, because it discards 1 and now they've only got the 4 to work with. If you had gone longer, for example, and say this bottom player hadn't put the joker down immediately and they went longer, you would have a larger deck that you'd be basing it off of. Before we close out, we're just going to go over the questions. In terms of fun, the strategy that I mentioned before, you're trying to figure out, do I want to use the joker right now or the ace right now and swap it? Because once you get to a certain point, now a war triggers immediately. Or Do you want to wait so you have a much larger pool? Because now if you have a larger pool, and say if you notice your opponent doesn't have that large of a pool, even though the values are equal, like the number of cards you put down, so the maximum is 5, even though that value is equal, what cards you have may not be. So if you had, say if the top player had the queen, the 2, and then all these numbers up here, and this bottom player only had 4, having more to choose from, having a bigger pool to choose from, they could use that to curate a larger value, simply because they have way more chances to have higher level cards, whereas this bottom player would only have these 4, so that's all they're working with. If the other player has more, they have much higher values, for example. Obviously, this bottom one, they got lucky and they got 2 kings in theirs. But if they hadn't gotten those kings, if they had a 2 and a 5, for example, that's a much bigger lead versus not. Other than that, the overall strategy of flipping between the stages, as I showed before, deciding what you want to go for. If you know that, hey, this stack is getting low, then you know it's going to trigger soon. So do you want to basically feed your cards back into it? Because if you're discarding cards, they're going back into the pile. Or are you confident in your cards that you're just going to let it run out? You're going to let it run out and just go for it after it's out. But on the flip side, you don't know what your opponent's doing. So if your opponent is sitting there going, I gotta reverse it because my cards aren't that good, and if we trigger the war, I'm probably gonna lose. You've got to be ready for that. Plan for that. In terms of difference, while this game does make use of war's battle mechanic, I gave meaning to all of the cards, whereas war, normally only that final card is the main, deciding factor, whereas the other cards, they only matter once you figure out what you lost. Once you figure that out, that's the only time they properly have meaning, once it's been, you've decided the winner and you flip them and you've seen them. Whereas for my game, it matters from beginning to end, because now you're adding or subtracting these, and you need to know, if you're getting that higher one, that higher value, you're trying to win that war, those cards in the middle matter a lot more than previously. All in all, my intent was to make a cycle where that reverse mechanic feeds into basically either preventing the war or triggering it on purpose for, your gain, which is where I came up with the war sometimes changes, because now you're flipping between, do you want to do war right now, or do you want to maintain some peace for as long as possible, because you're trying to build, so you have a much higher chance of getting those cards that you would need to win. Moving on from that. Same with these smaller cards, because in regular war, the smaller cards, in many cases, since obviously you do not have a choice of what you put down, and here you do have a choice of what you're putting down, but it is risky, because as I said, if you put down a lower card, there's a chance you're feeding the enemy, more cards. Whereas if it's the reverse, since it flips that value, whereas now this smaller card is the winner, you can find use for them, whereas in most cases, they kind of fall away. You never... If in regular war you were given the choice to put down a card, who would ever want to put down a lower card? If you had a 2, 3, and an 8, why would you ever put down the 2 or the 3 when the 2 or the 3 is a much higher chance of losing versus the 8? Which was my main intent, to try to build something that gave all cards meaning, no matter what. While it may flip, same as this card, while it may flip of the meaning, they will still have a purpose of some kind. Other than that, that's all I've got for you.